I put a lot of time and thought into choosing what idea I'm going to commit years of my life working on. So there's a lot of upfront work before I actually commit to an idea. And I look for, the idea has to have a lot of primary source material to work with. Obviously, if you're working nonfiction, you need to have things like you need to know how it smelled and how it felt, how it sounded, as well as dialogue and all those kinds of things that you can't get unless you have journals, etc. But yes, absolutely, you need to have compelling characters, not just the central character, but all this around them. And with this book, in fact, I didn't start with Garfield, who ends up being the central character of the book, because like most Americans, I knew almost nothing about him beyond the fact that he had been assassinated. I was interested in Alexander Graham Bell. I was just sort of doing some general research, just looking for ideas, and was interested in Bell, and was just doing some research on him, and kind of stumbled upon the story of him inventing something to try to find the bullet in Garfield after Garfield was shot. And I thought, I wonder what Garfield was like. I didn't know anything about him, so I started researching him, and I was just astonished. He was this remarkable man who's been almost completely forgotten, and that's when I was hooked. I didn't start off, I never thought I'll write a biography of Bell. I was just looking for some little story or something, that might click, might think, wow, that's interesting, and I'll follow it. So then I thought, oh, maybe there's something more I can do with this story of this, incredibly profound and famous inventor helping to save a president. But I knew there had to be something, a larger picture around that. And when I discovered, what an incredible man Garfield was, I knew I had it. And then, but you're right, I love the research. It's absolutely my favorite part by far. And in fact, I'm just starting a new book, and so excited to dive into the research part. I usually spend the first year just doing just really general research, going in with, knowing. Obviously, I have a base of knowledge and knowing there's some things I need to get, but not really knowing what I'm going to find, and that's my favorite part. Yeah, I never started out thinking, okay, this is the formula for me, but that's just kind of how it's worked out. And what I do know that I learned that writing my first book, I went into it not really having any idea how to write a book, but what I learned from that experience is that it's so important to spend that time working on the structure ahead of time, outlining and outlining and outlining and outlining. When I started writing River of Doubt, I had a good outline, I thought, and I had spent several months on the outline, but I got into the writing of it, and it can really get complex, if you're trying to set things up ahead of time and really get to know the characters. And when you read a book, you think, well, of course that's how it should be laid out, but when you're starting, you could start anyway, and it could go in any direction, really, even though it has a linear progression through the chronology. There are a lot of things that you have to make decisions about. And if you don't really understand why you've made those decisions and know exactly where you're headed before you start writing, it can be really painful. And that's what happened to me with River of Doubt. I got into the writing. This as a writer. I get into the writing, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't see the forest of the trees. And so I had to stop writing and go back and outline some more and move things, because it's so hard to move things around in writing when you're worrying about, word choice and things like that. You've got to know where you're going. So I spent a full year, absolutely, just working on structure for this book, but I have a whiteboard that shows kind of the big picture. These are the climaxes, these are the points of each chapter. And I have, a big book-long outline. I have a separate outline for each chapter. And then I have, sort of separated by themes, each subject, like for each person, but within each person, elements of their personality, their childhood, whatever, and the big themes that I want to touch on in the book. And as I'm doing research, I'm sticking things in there, quotes in there, and pieces of information, and with the information about where I can go back and find it. Because years later, when you start to write, you're like, oh, I know, I read that somewhere. Where was that? And so that really helps too. And I can't remember if I met somebody or I was just doing research and I heard about Baker, and then my parents took me to see it. And I just fell in love with it. It felt right to me. And then, when I applied and I got the scholarship, and it wasn't huge, but it helped a little bit. And it also, I wrote for the newspaper, for the Orange, and I'm so glad I did it. I loved Baker, I really did. And it has a fantastic English department, they're just wonderful teachers. And I got a great education there, and I loved it. And I was in a sorority, and it was just fun, it was just right. It was just what I needed.